Hey there, welcome back to the channel. As always, it has been a very long time since I've done one of these videos, so I just wanted to make something today, and we're almost at the halfway point of 2024, and I've already read almost 40 books, so I decided to maybe do kind of a best so far, These are some books that have definitely been the highlights of what I've read so far. They're probably going to make it into the top 10, but there's still tons of time for them to be beaten out by something else. But yeah, today I have a chunk of 5 books in no particular order, but yeah, these are just some of the absolute highlights in the first 5 or 6 months of 2024. So, first, we have The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is the first book in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. And I first picked this up because of Patrick Leo, the YouTuber, because he sings this series praises. And I don't really see it too often anywhere else on YouTube or Instagram or anything like that. And the cover was super cool. Patrick was a big fan, and I usually like his taste, so I picked it up. Really glad I did. This was one of the more kind of unique, fresh feeling, interesting modern fantasy books I've read in a long while. I won't do a full review of any of these here. I might do reviews of them later throughout the year, but really briefly, this book, it's the start of a trilogy, and it's essentially about this land and this people. I think they're called the Eborans, and they're kind of these immortal, godlike people, and they gain their kind of immortality from this kind of tree god. But the tree god seems to have died, and so this civilization is kind of slowly dying out as well. And usually, they are the fighters, the protectors of this realm during these kind of cyclical battles with these strange parasitic, kind of like insect-like creatures. And so this book, kind of explores that tension of this looming threat of a new invasion, a new cycle of violence, but without the powers and the weapons and the god, the presence of the god in the face of that. So really cool stuff. Some cool kind of horror imagery, really cool creatures, and at the heart of it, 3 really great characters. There's a trio of characters at the heart of this book, and they just have really great chemistry together. They've each got really interesting stories and kind of backgrounds, and they all feel really fleshed out. So I'm really excited to continue this series and see where it goes, because it ended on quite a, not necessarily a cliffhanger, but ended it really in a way that I can't wait to see what it builds to and where it goes next. The next one, again, these are in no order, but the next one I've got is one of the most unique and strange books I've ever read, and that's The Har by David Sodergren. This is a kind of folk horror book. It's quite short, and yeah, it's a folk horror book that takes place in a small coastal village in Scotland. And there's a couple of things I really like about this. One thing is the protagonist, who is a protagonist that you don't really see very often in kind of horror, in fantasy, and science fiction, in that she's an elderly woman, right? The main character, the character you're following this whole story, is an old woman in her 80s now, living on her own in this small village. And the plot essentially follows the attempts of an American development company, like real estate company, trying to buy out all of the residents of this small village in Scotland. I think the village is called Witchhaven. It's a fictional village. And slowly, a lot of the villagers are kind of taking the money, being bought out and kind of slowly leaving. And our main character, Muriel, is just too old, too stubborn, too attached to this place, and too attached to the memories of her husband, who passed years ago, but she had built an entire life in this village with him, so she refuses to go. And then, without going into any spoilers, there is a creature of some sort that comes in the har, which is a kind of Scottish word that means the kind of mist that comes in from the sea, like the really dense fog that comes in from the sea. And Muriel discovers this really strange creature, and from there, kind of horror follows. Some really cool, weird body horror. Some really kind of uncomfortable moments too. Like some of the body horror is really cool, and some of it is really quite graphic and strange and really like nothing I've ever read in other books or seen in movies that kind of use body horror. So really inventive and unique and strange. Um, and what I loved about this though is that it is a horror book, but it feels almost like, yeah, it feels folky and it feels tender because at the heart of this is, Muriel as a character and her relationship with this creature is actually like remarkably tender, and it's really just about her grieving her husband and her kind of connections with this land and the home that she'd built with her husband. So a really shocking, creepy horror novel, but with way more of a real emotional heart than I'd read in a book like this. So definitely recommend this, and I'm looking forward to checking out some of his other works. I'm probably first going to check out a book called Maggie's Grave, which also takes place in a small Scottish village, and I think is actually kind of referenced in this book. So yeah, The Horror by David Sodergren. Next, this is these next three actually are all science fiction. This is like last year a huge win for science fiction for me this year. Um, Most of the sci-fi books I've read this year have been absolute hits, and potentially no more so than Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. This is my second book that I've read by Stanislaw Lem. The first one was a really obscure one. I mean, this is his most well-known book by far, Solaris. The other book I read by him first is called Memoirs Found in a Bathtub, which is a really strange, politically pointed, but also quite vague, critique of both capitalism and communism. Yeah, really strange kind of what's the word? Kafkaesque, Kafkaesque sci-fi book about kind of bureaucracy and political manipulation and paranoia. This book is much more concise and to the point and poignant. This is one of the most not only kind of rich science fiction books, it is quite a hard sci-fi book at times. One of the most poignant, emotionally, impactful reading experiences I've had. So this book follows a man who is tasked to go to this station that is on a planet called Solaris. And this planet was discovered a few hundred years ago by humans, and it's covered in a kind of in a thick gelatinous oleaginous ocean, like a planet-wide ocean, and there's just a couple little islands throughout. And over the centuries, they realized that the ocean seems to be a single organism. The entire planet-wide ocean is a single organism and has some sort of intelligence and sentience. And so, yeah, humans have been studying this planet and this ocean for centuries now. And it follows this man who's sent to the research station above the ocean to essentially investigate whether or not they're going to keep the station running or they're going to finally close it down and kind of close down the field of study that has really grown up around this planet, Solaris. And once he's on the station, the crew essentially are haunted by physical manifestations of people in their past. So what's really interesting is that this is a hard sci-fi book, but it's also kind of a ghost story. And it's similar to The Horror. There's a real thread line in it of dealing with grief and dealing with the loss of loved ones, and extraordinary circumstances being the catalyst for actually kind of working through those things. So yeah, incredible book. Because of this kind of ghost story element, it's actually quite chilling at times. There is almost a horror element to it that is really quite striking and impactful. But the other thing I loved about this book is there's the really kind of emotional and kind of complex human drama at the heart of it about, what these characters are experiencing. But then the other part of the book is really kind of showing the failings of human ego and science, um, in understanding something that is so alien. There's huge sections of this book that are kind of giving a history of the study of Solaris and all of these theories that have grown up about it and all of these intellectual schools of thought, and how each of them is just kind of proven wrong, and none of them, like all of our tools, can't explain what this is, and it can't explain the phenomena that are happening to the characters. So it's this really great emotional, tragic, chilling ghost story essentially in space, with also a lot of really interesting hard science that itself is really telling a compelling point about our failure to really understand something that is entirely alien to us. So this was a brilliant book. Definitely makes me interested to read more Lem, and this one, I will be shocked if this is beaten out of my top 10. Solaris. The last two books, still in the sci-fi realm, Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the second book by Tchaikovsky I've read. The first one was Elder Race, which is a novella, and it's a brilliant novella. I actually have a review for it on my channel if you want to watch it. This is, again, potentially his most famous book, and this is the start of a trilogy. I think it's just called the Children of Time trilogy, and it's Children of Time, Children of Ruin, Children of Memory. And yeah, this is a hard science fiction book that is essentially about humanity's attempts. Essentially, humanity has not found intelligent life in the galaxy or in wherever they're exploring. So they've decided to seed intelligent life, and so they've created a nanovirus that drastically increases the speed and the kind of efficacy of evolution. And essentially, they're going to go seed intelligent life. They're bringing primates, mainly like chimpanzees, to a planet, and they're going to drop the nanovirus, and then they're going to kind of go into hibernation and come back in 100 years, 200 years, whenever, and then meet this new civilization and kind of live on this planet that's now been kind of developed by this new civilization. And things go terribly wrong, and something other than the chimps find the nanovirus first. A much more kind of creepy, crawly creature finds the nanovirus. And yeah, so then what this book does that's really brilliant is that the chapters alternate from a human perspective, and I don't know if it's a spoiler, so I won't say what the creature is that finds the nanovirus, but it's probably not a spoiler, but just in case. But it alternates between the human chapters and the other chapters, which are from the perspective of this creature drastically and quickly evolving and creating their own society, creating their own religion, creating their own political structures, creating their own architecture, and eventually actually creating their own kind of engineering projects that bring them to space age. And so it's really fascinating. I mean, it's described as kind of evolutionary world building, where, Tchaikovsky in this book really explores how an animal so different in anatomy to humans would develop language and political structures and architecture, and eventually, kind of spacefaring technology. So very cool world building. And then, of course, the plot revolves around what happens when humans and this new civilization, this unexpected civilization, eventually do come into contact and come into conflict. Brilliant book. Yeah, just I can't sing this book's praises enough. It was so fantastic, and I'm really excited to read the rest of the series. Although this does work, I've heard, kind of as a standalone, and I feel that way after reading it. If this was the only book, I'd be happy with that. But yeah, 2 more books in the series, and I'm definitely going to check them out. Okay, and last but not least is Death's End by Cixin Liu. This is the last book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, the 3 Body Problem series. I was really excited to watch the show that's just come out on Netflix, but I heard that they were kind of taking elements from the second and even third books, and kind of mixing them together. So I decided that I wanted to finish the series first. And I did. I read this book, and it was brilliant. It's probably my favorite book in the series. And yeah, it's difficult to describe because it's the third book in a series, without spoiling the other two books. But, essentially it follows, to go into mild spoilers for the other two books, you know, the series follows Earth's humanity's kind of interactions with an alien species that we call Trisolarans, because they come from a solar system with three stars. And because of the instability of that, they're trying to leave their solar system and they're coming to colonize Earth. And so the first two books are kind of exploring, the oncoming interaction before they actually arrive. And essentially, in the second book, there's mutually assured destruction, essentially, that creates a stalemate. This book is about the really tenuous, you know, footing that creates for both humans and these aliens, of this kind of mutually assured destructive peace. And then what happens when something else starts happening in the galaxy, in the universe, that neither humanity nor the Trisolarans have experienced before, and what that does for their relations. And yeah, I mean, I can't say much in terms of plot detail without spoiling it. The other reason I can't say many plot details is because this is a huge book and so much happens, to the point that the second half of this book, it's almost like a different series. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just so much has happened throughout the series, because this series really spans centuries. In fact, by the time you get to the end of this, it spans millions and millions and millions of years. And this book gets trippier than the other two. This one deals with extra dimensions and fewer dimensions. This book deals with multiverse stuff, pocket universes. It gets really, really out there, in a way that's really cool to see the trilogy develop from its kind of almost mundane beginnings in the first series to just how epic in scope it gets in this. I will say this also gets way, way darker than the other two books. There's some sections in this, especially in the first third or so, where I was really quite shocked at how dark it was going. And yeah, again, it's difficult to talk about this one because it's such a complex and intense series, and this being the third book, but phenomenal book. I'm really excited to watch the show now, and I am actually excited to read the kind of spin-off slash companion novel. I think the author's name is Baoshu, and it's called The Remembrance, or the Redemption of Time, and it is apparently approved by Cixin Liu, so it is technically canon. But yeah, incredible book. There's kind of a criticism of these books that they're great for their plot and great for their ideas and the science, but terrible for character. I actually really disagree with that. I think in each book there's at least one character, that I think is a real driving force, and I think they're maybe not all of these things, but they're at least one of these things, right? They're either really interesting or nuanced, or they're really tragic. They're compelling. They're relatable. They're not the deepest characters, but I think they are strong characters that kind of serve as through lines of each of the books. So that's Death's End, and that's the 5 real highlights of this year so far. Again, I've read almost 40 books. We're almost halfway through the year, and I'm excited to see if anything kind of kicks these out of those top 10 spots. But so far, already thrilled with what I've read. Have you read any of these? Are you excited to read anything similar, or do you have recommendations based on these? Let me know. I'd love to see what others are reading or what others are thinking of, in relation to these books. And yeah, I will try to do more videos. I'm going to maybe do some reviews for some of these books. And yeah, that's the video. That's the top 5 so far, I guess, of 2024. Thanks for checking in.